You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 118. Crying at the ancestral shrine, a loyal prince dies. Moving into Shu, two generals compete. The terrible news reaches Chengdu and the second ruler. He learns about the fall of Mianzhu and the deaths of Guanzhong and his son. The second ruler calls a council of advisors. There he is informed that panic has set in, as people flee the capital, anticipating a siege, or even conquest and occupation. Many advise him to flee south, and to take refuge with the Man tribes prior to launching a return invasion. But advisor Qiao Zhou rejects this, pointing out that the Man tribes are not exactly trustworthy, to put it mildly. He also opposes suggestions of an alliance with the Wu. Instead he advocates that there is no other option. The second ruler must surrender. At no point in our history has an emperor taken refuge in another country. It's after all far more likely that Wei will swallow Wu than the other way round, he says. Imagine how humiliating it would be to have surrendered to Wu only to then have to surrender again to Wei. Far better that we simply surrender to Wei. They'll surely give you a territory to dwell in and rule, and so you'll be able to protect and serve the ancestral shrine, as well as help protect the ordinary folk. The second ruler is unable to make up his mind and retires, deeply troubled. But the next morning he is still none the wiser about what course to take. Qiao Zhou then submits a memorial supporting surrender, and this helps the ruler decide. He will submit to the Wei. Imagine his astonishment when his son Lu Chen roars out his disapproval, and, rounding upon Qiao Zhou, calls him a coward for driving the second ruler into doing what no other emperor has ever done before. The second ruler has 7 sons, but frankly the others are pathetic specimens. Only Lu Chen has any spirit and strength. The second ruler rounds on his son, everyone else agrees. Only you want to increase the bloodshed, just because you're a shallow, warlike youth. Lu Chen tries to argue that they still have Jiang Wei, who can fight his way through. And denouncing Qiao Zhou as a worthless fop, he contends strongly that they should hold on. Take care and shut up. You have no grasp of the will of heaven, declares the second ruler. But still the young prince argues on, even declaring that he will not allow himself to live to see the day his patrimony is given away. But the second ruler will have none of this, and he orders the prince be cast out of the hall. Then he gives orders for the document of surrender to be drawn up. Soon the envoys arrive at Deng Ai's camp with the document of surrender and the seal of authority. They are treated well and return to the second ruler to inform him of what has happened. He then sends instructions to Jiang Wei to also surrender. But Lu Chen cannot bear the shame, and in his rage he returns to his palace, bearing his sword. His wife, Lady Cui, asks what the matter is. When he explains and says he will not kowtow to the Wei, but will kill himself so he can face Xuanda in the afterlife, she says she will do the same and asks permission to die first. Why? Asks a startled Lu Chen. My lord, you will die for your father, and I'll die for my husband. We follow the same rule and values. There can be no question. So saying, she smashes her head against a pillar and dies. The prince kills his 3 sons and, cutting off his wife's head, makes his way to the temple of the late Emperor Xuanda. Here, kneeling and weeping, he offers up the souls of his wife and sons, and then himself and slits his throat with his sword. A poet has said, ruler and courtiers happily bend the knee. Only one prince who could not bear the pain. So did the Western Shu cease to exist. The only hero the Northern Land's king, Lu Chen. He gave his life to save his ancestors' shame. Distraught, weeping below the blue sky. Yet he still seems here, awesome, ever present. Can one really say the Han have therefore perished? The entry of the Wei troops into Chengdu is as a triumph. In relief the people cheer and strew flowers on the ground. The second ruler is allowed to keep his palace. The people are assured of good governance. Envoys are sent to Jiang Wei to ensure his surrender, while messengers are sent to Chang'an to tell of the victory. Despite Deng Ai's best efforts, Huang Hao escapes by bribing those around him. This is the end of the Han. A poet, Li Shangyin, later wrote, "Even the fish, birds and monkeys obeyed his commands. Wind and rain created his defense. And yet, what his followers wrote of his strategy, gone. The end, a prince fallen and carried river-wise away. He emulated his models, Guanzhong and Yue. But once they'd passed, what hope did he have really? Perhaps next year we'll walk by his shrine. Our songs will be sung and completed, but what of our grief?" When news of the surrender reaches Jiang Wei, his rage is awesome to behold, as is the anger of his men. They want to attack straight away, but Jiang Wei says, "Don't worry. I have a plan by which the Han will be restored," and he shares this privately with his commanders. So Jiang Wei leads his officers to surrender to Zhong Hui, where he is treated as an honored guest. "Frankly, I have been so impressed by your campaigns," says Jiang Wei, "that I am more than prepared to surrender to you. Had it been Deng Ai, why I would have fought to the death." This warms Zhong Hui's heart, and soon the two men are great friends once more. When news of Jiang Wei's surrender to Zhong Hui reaches Deng Ai in the capital, he is deeply perturbed by this and immediately writes to Sima Zhao, basically saying that, in order to impress Wu and perhaps encourage their surrender, the second ruler, now simply known as Liu Shan, should be given an estate, Izhou, and honors and kept in luxury in Shu so that Sun Xiu can see how benevolent the Wei are to those who submit. This causes considerable anxiety to Sima Zhao, who reads in this a plot by Deng Ai to take over the Shu kingdom for himself. He sends two messages back. A formal one full of praise and citing historical precedents for such a splendid general, and a private letter basically saying, "Don't go making such decisions until we have had time to consider them. Then we will tell you what is going to happen. This may well take some time, so be patient." Deng Ai is furious with what is clearly a rebuke. He writes back, pointing out that, historically, the commander in the field can override edicts from the court, which, because of distance, cannot be as aware of the situation and the need to act as the commander. He finishes his letter by reassuring Sima Zhao that he will do nothing to harm the kingdom. This only increases Sima Zhao's anxieties, and he consults Jia Chong, who recommends using Zhong Hui to control Deng Ai by promoting him. So a letter goes to Zhong Hui, giving him increased status and power, not least in Shu. Sharing this with Jiang Wei, he interprets the promotion as a coded message that Deng Ai is not only slipping out of favor, but is even being viewed as a potential rebel. Jiang Wei, flattering Zhong Hui, reinforces the impression that Deng Ai is becoming a traitor. He also shows, via a map, that this plan to establish the fallen Shu ruler in Izhou reflects the same historical situation, when Kong Ming helped Xuanda set up his initial power base. So, says Zhong Hui, how do we get rid of Deng Ai? Clearly, says Jiang Wei, Sima Zhao is really worried about him. Write to him outlining your reading of Deng Ai's treacherous plots and actions, and then with Sima's permission you can crush Deng Ai. So the memorial is sent. To add to the confusion and distrust, Zhong Hui intercepts Deng Ai's own memorial explaining his actions and adds some sentences which incriminate Deng Ai even more if read by a mistrustful mind. Almost immediately Sima Zhao orders Zhong Hui to arrest Deng Ai, and he himself sets off with 30,000 men to ensure this happens. But Sima Zhao also has another reason to go. As he reminds Xiao Ti, his advisor, I don't trust Zhong Hui. That's why I'm going, not because of Deng Ai. When Sima Zhao arrives in Chang'an, Zhong Hui commences his plans to capture Deng Ai. In Shu, an emperor overthrown, the victor he. From Chengdu a great army descends, its victim? Him. How does this roll out? Swiftly.